The Book of Inner Paths by Péter Popper, translated from the Hungarian by Gábor Szurányi and Joshua A. Williams. Recorded and sound edited by Mindfreak Productions, narrated by Sam Hall. Episode 4, The Morning, Cultivating the Beginning of the Day. In what regards the harmony of our whole day, it is the time constraints and the mad rush of the mornings that are most detrimental. If people, adults and children, storm out of their homes, their whole day will be negatively affected by the bad mood of the morning. In order to start our day properly, we first need to ensure ourselves enough time, even if this means getting up half an hour earlier. This investment will pay dividends. It ensures that there is enough time available to deal with morning tasks, including sitting down for breakfast and some minutes for short morning conversations. It is a great achievement if nobody begins their day in a nervous state of mind. Exercise. Every morning, we ensure 10 minutes of calm, uninterrupted time for ourselves. If there aren't many possibilities in our apartment, even the bathroom can serve as a location. We sit down and think through all the tasks we have to deal with that day. Accounting for these tasks sequentially helps us to prepare for them and prevents us from rushing. During this review, we should consider the following. This is how I'm going to spend my day. Will I have time for everything I've planned? If not, which task is the least important and the one I can postpone? What unpleasant, awkward situations will I possibly encounter? Are they necessary, or is it possible to avoid them? If not, how will I behave in these situations? Am I right? Predictably, what behaviour will other people show towards me? How will I react? Is this the only possible behaviour? What joys will I experience if we can't find anything we can look forward to? We should look inside. What would we really like to do? Can we make time for this activity today? Finally, we need to finish with a pleasant experience. We can recite a few lines from our favourite poem, revisit a happy memory, something our child said or did, how our beloved one cheered us up with a compliment or a touch, or we can think about a movie we liked or some delightful scenery or music. We should leave the home with this good memory in our mind. One of the main elements of succeeding in this exercise is the attitude that stops us from seeing the day's impending occurrences as unchangeable, like natural phenomena. It helps us to realize how many things depend on our own volition and determination. Over the course of this exercise, we slowly develop a system of values. We learn to distinguish between important and less important tasks, and we reserve the right to skip the latter for our own well-being. To view this as egotistical is wrong. For every family, it is better to have a cheerful mother and father, even if the apartment looks a little dusty or untidy, than living in an immaculate castle with a bored and exhausted, self-appointed martyr bustling around. Exercise 2. During the day. Half an hour only for me. This is the least everyone deserves. Usually after work, but before starting with additional duties, we should give ourselves this half an hour of relaxation and leisure. We should do something in this time that fulfills our needs. We can take a walk, go window shopping, order a coffee and watch people walking by, browse in our favourite bookstore, or read a sports magazine in the park. The point is for us to have our own free half an hour that we can spend however we want. Warning: Those who claim that they can't find the time for this are deceiving themselves. If they evaluate their day truthfully, they will realize that they waste much more time on TV, social media, and Netflix. Evening reflection. Exercise 3. Cultivating the end of the day. This is the most important exercise. This is also the most difficult exercise to perform. Nonetheless, if we get accustomed to it, it will become a primal need that can assure our own psychological balance almost without any other effort. Evening recollection is a basic exercise for self-discovery, self-control, and for fundamental understanding of situations. At night, lying in bed, we visually relive our whole day, and from when we got up in the morning until now. This recollection must be visual. We should relive the day as if it were a movie. The point is to become an external observer, not only of the happenings of that day, but also of ourselves as well. We should see ourselves walking on the street, working and arguing with someone. Keeping the sequential order is also essential. The basic approach to this exercise is to build up a distance from the self. We should view ourselves as a stranger, separate from all other things and people. We should allow the behaviour of this person, ourselves, as well as the behaviour of the people with whom we had contact that day, to freely affect us. As a result of this few minutes method of looking at ourselves and the things that happened to us from a distance, we can gain an unexpected amount of hidden information and knowledge. This exercise provides a plethora of surplus experiences that help us to significantly develop certain abilities in a short period of time. For example, our self-awareness, our ability to get to know people and to realistically assess situations and to have control over our behaviour. It also opens up more possibilities for change. Those who practice this kind of evening reflection might face the following difficulties. 1. Their thoughts start to wander. The chronological order gets disrupted and they get overwhelmed with emotions, associations and memories. By the time they realise this, their thoughts have diverged far from reliving the day's events. 2. They fall asleep during the evening reflection. They only get through a quarter of the day, and the next second they wake up and realise it's already morning. To prevent falling asleep, it is advisable to avoid going down to the last detail. The reflection should be essentially movie-like. It should have a good rhythm with scenes concentrating on significant occurrences. If needed, we can linger a little longer on the more important situations or events to look into them more. Once we can perform the recollection in a correct way, without our thoughts wandering away or without falling asleep, we can, in the interest of developing our psychological powers, switch to a more difficult form of this exercise, which is reliving the day in reverse order. This entails starting from the time of going to bed and finishing with waking up in the morning. Looking back in our day in reversed order, similarly to Carinthi's movie of a life in reverse, affords us the opportunity to develop our ability to concentrate in a more advanced manner. I would like to emphasize one thing again. The evening reflection can be performed as a standalone exercise. It constitutes one of the most important methods of self-maintenance and combines the benefits of many smaller exercises. This concludes this chapter about the cultivation of our day. The essence of this section is that we should not blame objective circumstances, but rather should accept the fact that we are responsible for our own lifestyle. The rhythm of our lives pushes us often to be in a hurry. However, there is a great difference between rushing in a composed way and rushing nervously. The choice is mainly ours. What constitutes the greatest danger to our psychological balance is momentary or long-lasting emotional tension that is intense and difficult to bear. It should not, however, be forgotten that emotions and passion experienced to their full intensity are a vital part of a complete human life. Those people who are always composed, unemotional, and who never give any sign of happiness, sadness, love, caring, anger, or satisfaction are a truly terrifying spectacle. This often manifests itself in a monotonous and toneless voice, and it either signals a lack of emotion or it can show that the person is afraid of his or her own feelings. He may be trying to suppress his emotions, hiding them from himself and from others. When we are addressing the possibilities for decreasing emotional tensions, our goal is not to empty ourselves of emotions, but rather to enrich them. The impoverishment of our emotional life can also be caused by one feeling, emotion, or passion that overcomes us. This entity can, for a longer or shorter period of time, take full possession of our psyche by suppressing any other possible emotional reaction. In the following, we will examine how we can release unbalanced tensions that are caused by overwhelming emotions. In the case of a healthy individual, it is rare for one particular mood, emotion, or passion to take control of the whole psyche. Violent jealousy, phobias, for example, belong to the realm of psychopathology and inevitably require psychotherapy and sometimes medical treatment. In such cases, we have an obligation to ourselves and others around us to seek out clinical psychological help. Most often, however, an isolated occurrence or an experienced situation arouses intense emotions in us and severely disturbs our emotional life. Usually, these emotionally overcharged situations only last for a short period of time. They usually pass within a few minutes, hours, or days. Nonetheless, if we are subject to these temporary and extreme emotional reactions, then these situations come up too often and bring about a narrowing of our range of thought and lead to a decrease in our self-control. In these cases, we do or say things that we later regret, which leads to a troubled consciousness. The result is an ever-changing existence of overexcitement and tension that is difficult for us and for those around us to endure. It is, of course, extremely difficult to change our character and those set ways in which we react. A change like this can only be achieved through long-term introspective efforts, through a self-awareness and self-development process aided by psychotherapy, or by employing focusing and meditative exercises. This is not the purpose of this chapter's preparatory exercises. Their purpose is to bring about an understanding of the reasons behind temporary oversensitivity and strong emotional reactions. Additionally, they serve to develop an understanding of the process of stress buildup. It is also not the purpose of these exercises to help us recognize these reactions after the fact, but rather we are to learn how to catch ourselves red-handed at the moment when we produce these inappropriate emotional reactions. Only then can we consciously prevent their getting out of control. Epictetus was probably right when he said that it is not the things or occurrences themselves that conjure up emotions and passion that are unbearable for us, but rather the notions we have about these things or occurrences. If we assess our elemental emotions, we usually discover that they only last as long as their cause is present. A toothache does not bother us after the pain is gone. After we have drunk, we no longer, in retrospect, consider our thirst. On the other hand, affronts, embarrassing situations and failures that we have faced in our social life and as a result of our relationships will exert a long-lasting, intensive effect upon us. These torment us even after the occurrence itself and all of its possible consequences have long since become insignificant. It can be presumed, then, that the basis, sentiments and associations and imagination that are connected to these events can serve to preserve this emotional effect. The strength and intensity of our emotions can be significantly increased or reduced according to our subjective sentiment about them. Consequently, these emotional and intellectual functions operate in close interaction to each other. It must be understood that our emotions are not under our conscious control. It is only possible to recognize our emotions and, perhaps, to suppress them. We cannot, however, decide to love somebody we hate or to be indifferent towards someone we admire. It is not a question of will when it comes to whom we like and whom we dislike. Most often, we are not even consistently aware of the formation of these emotions. We realize suddenly that they're there, and, at best, we try to find explanations for them in retrospection. If we consider our intellectual functions, though, we actually have a much greater freedom when it comes to their conscious operation and control. For this reason, it is logical that we should, foremost, endeavour to gain control over our excessively unstable and impulsive reactions by working from the intellectual side. To understand the underlying mechanisms of these exercises, we should take into consideration that all of our psychological processes are energetic phenomena. The psyche itself is energy, or to be precise, it is a system of energetic processes flowing along relatively stationary or temporary routes. The source of these energetic processes is our whole body and, in particular, the operation of our central nervous system. The psychological content comes from the information that we take in, both from the outside and from our inner world. Using the human-machine metaphor simply as a tool, but not accepting it as more than such, let us look at our central nervous system as if it were a very high-performing computer. There are two possible reasons for why a computer might malfunction. First, the hardware might be defective. In our case, this translates into organic malfunctions. However, even if the hardware is performing perfectly, the results will not be satisfactory if the installed software itself has errors. From a psychological point of view, this translates into functional disorders, which includes every faulty item or piece of false information that we installed during our upbringing and our development. Consequently, these exercises are aimed at perfecting the software. The consideration of psychological processes as energetic phenomena is to be taken literally. If we recall some of the basic laws of energy, we will realize that they can be applied quite aptly to our own psychological processes. This knowledge opens up possibilities for us to influence and change these phenomena. 1. The law of dynamics. Every psychological phenomenon is effectively or potentially process-like. Therefore, there are no static psychological phenomena. Every psychological process, every thought, emotion, and action is heading somewhere. The process can be rapid, or it can be so slow that many years have passed before we realize that a change has occurred. The main premise, however, remains. One of the latter exercises explores this question. What tendencies are characteristic of our emotions, lifestyle, and learning process? What are we leaving behind, and what are we approaching? 2. The law of transformation. Every psychological phenomenon can be transformed into something different. We experience this in our mental life as anxiety hinders our intellectual performance and our intellectual failures make us uneasy. Emotional energy can be transformed into intellectual energy and vice versa. Transformation processes can take place within a certain type of psychological phenomenon. For example, fear can make us aggressive, and aggression can cause angst, and lovesickness can turn into hate. In this way, different types of emotion can transform into each other. There are also transformation processes going on between our bodily and mental functions. If our thyroid is overactive, we become irritable. This is a biological process that has physiological effects. On the other hand, if we have angst, our heart starts to beat faster, we start to sweat, our excretory processes speed up, etc. This is a psychological process that produces biological effects. The psychosomatic approach of modern medicine and psychology is based on these principles. This modern approach replaces the dualist model of the human. There are no functions that are entirely biological or entirely psychological. It is always the whole individual that is operating, completely independent of how conscious we are of these operations and their consequences. Every other artificial simplification serves either research or educational purposes. This is similar to the way a mathematician breaks down an overly complex equation into simpler ones. 3. The law of transposability. Psychological processes can be redirected from one target to another, the same way a portable heater can be redirected to change the flow of heat. Similarly, the object of our love or hatred can change, and the focus of our interest and attention can shift too. A man's rage might erupt at home after silently bearing his boss's scolding. For this reason he picks a fight with his wife. His rage is meant for his boss, but it is his wife who suffers. If the incident in his workplace hadn't happened, no conflict would have arisen at home. The law of least resistance. Every psychological process, unless it is artificially regulated, naturally follows the path of least resistance. Our mental reactions also follow the path of least resistance. This is why children and subordinates must suffer the most from aggression. They are the most vulnerable and they pose the least risk. They are the path of least resistance. The law of the division of energy. Psychological tension can be discharged in one impulse, but it can also be broken up. Steam pressure can cause a furnace to explode. However, with the help of valves, we can not only divide the steam and release it gradually, but we can utilize its energy. A nuclear explosion is devastating. Nuclear reactors utilize the same process, but they harness it, and thus the result is productive. This is also true in the case of psychological tension. Strain can cause psychological disruptions which damage not only our life, but also the lives of others around us. It is possible, however, that they can be put to use for constructive and creative purposes. Many times, the breaking up of these tensions and emotions happens spontaneously as a means of protecting our way of life. If, one evening, we were to analyse a couple that was fighting, we would see 8 to 10 similar conflicts arising. Where is my newspaper? Why didn't I get the cheese from the market? Why didn't he wipe his feet on the doormat? Why did she invite people over? Why does he want to go see the game again? And so forth. It is obvious that the problem is not about the missing cheese. Presumably, there are more important and unsettled issues and feelings of dissatisfaction that are causing tension between the two. If the tension were to erupt all at once, these people would start throwing plates at each other and might even require a divorce. Instead, they release their emotions through smaller conflicts. Many times, this is the process that lies behind these petty fights. With these few examples, I have attempted to illustrate the energetic nature of psychological processes. This is what our exercises are based on. Exercise 1. Sorting emotional responses of different importance. This sizable exercise for understanding and controlling subjective emotional values should be practiced for at least 3, but preferably 6 months. We should buy a notebook, and every night before going to bed, we should note down all of the occurrences that upset us or stirred up strong emotions during the day. At the weekend, as we read through our notes, we should pay attention to those occurrences that still evoke a response from us, giving us pain or happiness. These entries should stay untouched. The others we can cross out. After a month's time, we should not really skim through the notes from the last week, but we should read through all of the emotionally important occurrences of the last 4 weeks. Again, we should leave only those events untouched that still affect us. The others we can now cross out. After a whole cycle, we should read through all of our notes. Only those that still stir a significant emotional response within us are to be considered truly important. The others can be considered incidents. In order to successfully perform this exercise, a very high level of consistency is necessary. It is worth the effort, and it will be shocking to see how few occurrences there are that are worth our emotional attention. We will, in fact, realize how much we worried unnecessarily. As a result of this exercise, we will learn to differentiate between emotionally important and unimportant occurrences, and, later, we will be able to do this not only retrospectively, but even at the time of their occurrence. A smile will take the place of our initial excitement because we will know that this excitement will wear off on its own and quite soon. The event would be crossed out by the time the weekend came. This exercise will also add to the body of knowledge about ourselves. It will show us which type of emotions we are overly sensitive to, what situations cause us unnecessary excitement, and what the issues are that have a profound effect on our emotional world. Exercise 2. Role swaps exercises. The basic attitude to adopt for this exercise is that we must see emotional reactions not as unchangeable natural phenomena, but rather as something that has a reason, a developmental path, and many transformational processes. These things can be learnt, and occasionally they can be changed. The subject of the exercise can be a troublesome conflict, occurrence, or outburst, a problematic or hurtful, long-lasting feeling, such as anger, aversion, or a deterioration of a relationship, a personal characteristic that we do not like about ourselves, or that is hard to tolerate. The first phase of the exercise. On multiple occasions, we invest half an hour to investigate the story, development behind the problematic or hurtful emotion in question, such as anger, aversion, or a deteriorating relationship. In our mind, we relive the scene or the development of the whole relationship from its first moment until the present. We describe our initial feelings exactly, and we look for the critical points or situations that cause changes in them. During this process, forgotten episodes will necessarily come up. From among these episodes, there are significant ones which still cause us pain. Pain means that we were unable to work through these experiences. In other words, we could not deal with them ourselves and they remained psychologically undigested. The same type of investigation can be conducted to identify the roots of our undesirable characteristics. We can search for those earlier situations, sometimes from childhood, when, for example, we behaved cowardly for the first time, when we lied in given predicaments for the first time, or, when afraid, we acted aggressively for the first time. We will discover that our behaviour contains a lot of paradoxical elements. For example, we might see that we have an irrational fear of people. We feel vulnerable and unprotected because of this. We behave in a cold and belligerent manner. The second phase of the exercise. Now we should go through the same situation from the other person's point of view. Here, we put ourselves in his or her shoes. It is now him or her who behaves like us and recites our sentences. We should pay attention to what kind of reactions we have. The results might not be pleasant for us, but, in any case, they will make many aspects of our own and our partner's behaviour clear. These experiences can open up a path for change. The essence of this second phase is an imaginary role swap whose focus is a confrontational and hurtful situation. The third phase of the exercise. Now we relive these occurrences in our imagination in a different way. During these role swaps, we choose a different behaviour for both ourselves and for our partner, mother, father, child, friend or partner, than the ones in the original situation. How would the situation have developed differently? How would the relationship have changed? The point of this different behaviour is to choose an opposite form of conduct. If we acted rude in our imagination, we should be gentle. If we were humble, we should look to be more dominant. The most important outcome of this exercise is that our established, firmly entrenched and stereotypically repeated roles and behaviours will be deconstructed. We might discover that in similar situations, irrespective of the disastrous consequences that we have many times experienced, we mechanically repeat our behaviour. And it seems as if we have already developed cues for situations with our more constant partners. We grumble with our spouse. We mock our subordinate. We flatter our boss. We lecture our children. We should try listening to our lecture through the ears of our child and try experiencing our haughtiness from the viewpoint of our subordinate, and so forth. After a time, knowledge of these behavioural patterns will prevent us from involuntarily repeating them. Our behaviour will become alive again, and we will have more compassion towards other people, and less egocentric injustice will reside within us. It is essential that we come to terms with the fact that performing these types of exercises poses a great challenge to our self-acceptance. It attacks our vanity and our self-defense mechanisms. The exercises described in the previous chapters, essentially the 5 basic exercises, open up a path that leads us from forming an unbiased judgment of the outside world towards seeing ourselves objectively. These basic exercises increase our capacity for bearing burdens and enhance our inner strength to a level where we'll be ready to accept these feelings as we approach this new echelon. It will be realized that we are gradually letting go of our flight and defense reactions. We lie less often when faced with stressful stimulation. We fly into rage only rarely, and we will use alcohol less often to calm our nerves. Finally, we will not entrench ourselves in impregnable mindsets. Exercise 3. The exercise on confrontation. This exercise requires significant internal strength. We might notice that there are certain situations in our lives from which we constantly flee. These might be emotionally or sexually unsettling situations, or they might be a fear of confronting certain people, a colleague or a boss. Without fail, we suppress our irritation when these situations arise. It could also be that we have fear of certain family or social interactions, of our rival, or simply of our own psychological characteristics. For example, we might have a fear of our inhibitions. As a result, a certain situation can be perpetuated, and we might find ourselves running from this feared situation. With the help of this exercise on confrontation, we can break this cycle. A. Confrontation in thoughts. It is not an accident that Freud said that thinking is an experiment involving small quantities of energy. We picture the situation we are afraid of right alongside our seasoned flight reaction. Now we change our behaviour and, in our mind, we confront the situation. We must elaborate on this thought in great detail and live out the situation in our mind. We should clearly formulate words of the sentences we would say. We should see our own behaviour as if it were a movie, and we should hear not only what other people say, but also how we would react to it. The point is to change our defensive behaviour into an offensive one. We should face the risk that living through this scary situation poses to us. The prerequisite for this exercise is that our trueness must be proved objectively. This must have already been decided in the course of the previous exercises. Eventually, in our thoughts, we reach a behaviour and a solution that brings us inner satisfaction. In most of the cases, this means a decision or a choice. In most cases, we dread taking responsibility for our decisions and we fear the consequences of our choices. In anticipation of this, we want to secure ourselves against any unfavourable circumstances. It is because of this that we allow unbearable situations to go on for years. This imaginary confrontation should be repeated many times over, and it should be practiced. We should repeat the exercise until we get used to the thought of confrontation, until our angst subsides, and until we begin to develop a need for confrontation. B. Confrontation in reality. In some cases, confrontation in our thoughts automatically leads to its implementation in practice. Suddenly, when considering one of our recurring unresolved situations, we might say out aloud the things that we have worked out in our thoughts. The confrontation has now happened in reality, and so we can move on. In other cases, however, the real confrontation needs additional effort. In preparation for this, we should go over the following in our minds several times. The first reflection: life should not always be sunshine. We need to make a place for failure, defeat, and new beginnings. These situations help us to develop characteristics, opportunities, and knowledge that would have otherwise remained hidden had we kept to a safer path. The second reflection. In general, the results are not as disastrous as our imagination makes them out to be. People respect courage. It is only our cowardice that leads them to take advantage of our situation. Our changed behaviour will change their behaviour as well. It could be that as a result of this change, they will respect and accept us even more. The third reflection. Some situations in life can only be handled with a certain callousness or even remorselessness. On many occasions, a fear of being a little tough or of causing pain leads us to defer our decision and thus creates a more serious situation for which there is only one resolution: cruelty. We put off confrontation regarding small, tense situations until the point where we are forced to tolerate situations of much greater tension. The fourth reflection. How often has protecting ourselves and accepting to spare ourselves led to even more trouble? The apprehension that prevents us from acting is often merely an excuse for masking unjustified cowardice and self-protection. Many times, we are not even really compassionate, but rather we are simply selfish. The fifth reflection. The way by which our circumstances will evolve as we move into the future is determined by a myriad of complex elements that are not always entirely predictable. If we are not ready to make decisions, we relinquish control of the events. This leads us to passively suffer from them. If we make a decision, we cannot also predict all of its consequences. However, the mere fact that we made the decision will help us psychologically. It will harden us and improve our sense of security. The sixth reflection. If somebody had shown us the circumstances today and our current life 5 years ago, we would have looked at them as mere impossibilities. The same would be true today were we to be given the opportunity to see ourselves in 5 years in the future. Therefore, we should not give too much consideration to our predictions regarding the future. Fleeting moments of embarrassment do not last forever. In fact, they might even hold the key for future opportunity. Going over these thoughts will inevitably move us towards real confrontation. It will also bring us closer to holding true to our decisions and seeking out the resolutions to the most embarrassing situations. End of episode 4.